Hello readers, here today to bring some book recommendations for authors. This is probably going to be an unpopular opinions video because two of my three authors are authors that we talk about a lot, particularly one. So I'm going to go ahead and get into it. Know that this book is entirely based off of my own opinions. I am a big reader. I love books. Not necessarily by all of these authors, but just because an author is great does not mean that they cannot improve. Thus, this video. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with E.L. James, the author of the 50 Shades trilogy. I have so many things to say that I never quite know where to start, but gonna go ahead and, for the sake of this video, stick to the book recommendations and my reasons why. So, one of my big book recommendations for E.L. James to read to improve her extraordinarily subpar writing and storytelling is Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. I have not actually gotten around to reading this book myself yet. I've struggled a little bit with the writing because it's kind of textbooky, but I've heard so many great things about this book. I really do want to just sit down and bulldoze through it one of these days, and I've never heard a bad thing about it, really. This is a book talking about women's bodies and people's bodies and how to have better sex, how to have better communication. It just really dives in to what makes good sex, what makes a good relationship. And I think this is super important for E.L. James to read because she has an extraordinarily toxic relationship in this book. She has absolutely no knowledge of what BDSM really entails. And this book it needs to be on her must-read list because I think that this book would have so much to teach her so that she could continue writing and make her writing better. Make her writing and her storytelling something not only worth reading, but something healthier than what she wrote. Again, so many thoughts. Next book that I would recommend to E.L. James is any of the original novels by V.C. Andrews. By original, I mean the first two series that she wrote and the first standalone that she wrote, because all the other books written by her were after she died and are written by ghostwriters. So I'd stick to the originals. I should probably do a video on ghostwriting at some point, because I have some thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts in this video, but anyways, V.C. Andrews, I loved reading her in high school and in college. She doesn't portray the healthiest relationships by any means. There is a lot of trigger warnings for incest and unhealthy sexual relationships. So basically, I'm kind of taking back everything that I have previously said in this video. But in spite of all of the unhealthy relationship portrayals, I still really loved these books. And that was because of the writing. So this book is not so much a lesson in what a healthy relationship looks like, which it very much is not. But V.C. Andrews had a way of writing about those relationships that really just captured me. Her writing style, for me, was very erotic, not in that it had a ton of sexual detail, which it didn't, but just her way of saying things, her way of writing a sentence sounded very erotic. And I think that's a writing style that would really go well with E.L. James's books. So if she wanted to become a better writer, get a better writing style, improve on her writing, I would go with V.C. Andrews because they have somewhat similar content, but V.C. Andrews' writing is so much better than E.L. James' writing at the moment. I have one last book. It's kind of a bonus book for E.L. James, and that is The 50 Shames of Earl Grey. This book is written by Fanny Merkin, aka Andrew Schaefer, and this book was hilarious. It takes so many shots at 50 Shades of Grey, talking about the connections to Twilight, the ridiculousness of the sexual scenes. It was hilarious. Again, it really took shots at that original book, and I think E.L. James should read this so she knows and has a better idea of what a lot of the rest of the world thinks about her writing. And it would really just put right there in her face the things that she needs to improve on, such as come up with some of your own content. Try to be somewhat original and not lean so heavily on everyone else's books. Come up with your own stuff. I just think that this book was hilarious, and it would be a great one for her to read, so she'd be like, okay, that's what people really think of my books. Here are some things I could improve on. Second author, most of you are probably not going to be super happy with the things that I have to say. That's kind of an assumption of mine, because I know that this author is super popular, and I don't hear a lot about his new books. I don't know what all of you think of his newer writing, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out there. Again, this book is entirely based on my own opinions. Take it for what it is. It is an opinion. It is my viewpoint. Don't come at me in the comments. The next author that I have books to recommend to is Stephen King. Hear me out. Stephen King has written a lot of books. I don't have a current count on the number of books that he's written. His original books, for the most part, were very well done. They're very, very popular. Some of his most famous work is some of his original work, the classic Stephen King. From what I've seen, from what I've read, most of his newer work is very poorly done and just doesn't have the quality of his original writing. A lot of people seem to kind of point at the car accident that he was in whenever he was writing the Gunslinger series, the Dark Tower series, and that's when he really just started to pump out the books without spending all the time on it that he used to with his original books. So I have some tips for Stephen King, and the first is, please read your memoir on writing. Yes, I am recommending Stephen King's own books to him. The whole list of books that I have to recommend to Stephen King are his own books. I have not read On Writing. I've heard amazing things about it. I'm probably not going to read it because I'm not really interested in writing myself. But this book is supposed to be a nonfiction memoir / book about writing books. And I think that he needs to go back and read this and read some of his own tips, read about some of his own experiences, and really just go back to the basics with his writing. There is a big difference between quality and quantity. And right now, Stephen King is concentrating on quantity, not so much on quality. His books just don't have what they used to. The one exception that I've heard about is 11/22/63. That is one of his newer books that I hear really, really hit the mark. That is on my list of books to read. But all of his other newer stuff just really isn't quite getting there. So, go back to your memoir, read that. My other books that I have to recommend are a combination of some of his most famous works and one of my favorites of his. I'm going to start off with Carrie. Carrie was Stephen King's first published novel. I think he needs to go back and read this. It's short, which you don't find a lot of short Stephen King books. It talks about bullying. It's based on a true story, on an experience. Not that the magic part is true, but it's based on an experience, on things that he saw when he himself was growing up, when he wished that he had done something about a girl that was getting bullied. He took that true life experience and really turned it into something, and that was Carrie, and I think that this book was brilliant. The next book that I have to recommend to him is Stephen King. One of his most famous books, probably the most famous book of his, next to The Shining. Pet Sematary did have horror in it, but it was also about grief. Again, this goes back to taking life experiences and turning them into a story, turning them into a horror book. Again, this book was absolutely brilliant, and I think he needs to go back and look at his really great work, see how he has changed, and maybe try and bring some of that back, because we're missing a lot of the greatness of Stephen King in his newer works. The last one I have to recommend to him is Needful Things. I didn't love the ending of this book, but on a whole, I adored this book. I loved the way the story went. It had a lot of characters, which I struggle with having this many characters in a book, but he played it so well. He takes each of these characters and starts to merge them together. You start to watch this town fall apart as it starts to attack itself. And that was a really great look at group dynamics and at the human psychology. And I think that he did really, really well with this. Again, he needs to go back to basics. Go back to his classic books. Go back to people's favorites. See what he did then as compared to what he is doing now. Take a good hard look at everything, because Stephen King has shown that he can be a great writer, but his new work just isn't hitting the mark anymore. Last one that I have is not one that I think a ton of people have read because so far she just has a debut novel, but that is Emma Chapman, who did How to Be a Good Wife. I just finished this in February, and I have some thoughts. I have read a lot of 3-star books this month. Not ones that I've loved, not ones that I've hated, but I definitely haven't really enjoyed them, and this was one of those. So How to Be a Good Wife is following this woman who seems to be kind of going crazy. She's off of her meds. She's seeing things. Her family is confused about what's going on. Why is she off her meds? And it's literally a daily account of her life until we get to the end. And we just don't need that daily account. It's interesting to see her fall apart, but it doesn't really go anywhere particularly quickly. And slow burns can be great books, but this was not one of those. This was 270 pages, and it easily could have been 100 or less and been so much better. This was just too slow. We didn't have enough information until the end of it. And by the end, I really just didn't care, and I kind of wish that I DNF'd this book because it ended up not being worth it for me. So, books that I have to recommend to her, because she is a debut author, so she does have some growing to do. I'm going to go ahead and recommend some novellas to show her, hey, you can tell a great story and it doesn't have to be over 200 pages. First one is The Stepford Wives. The Stepford Wives takes the feminist fear of the patriarchy and men's fear of women and turns it into a 180-page story that really just hits you in the gut by the end of it. This book had something to say, and it was important and it was interesting, and Ira Levin never missed out on an opportunity to include symbolism. This book was awesome, and I think it would show her that you don't have to have a ton of pages to get your point across. Next book that I have to recommend is Of Mice and Men. So with How to Be a Good Wife, you're kind of left wondering, is this a story of trauma, of PTSD? Is this a story of mental illness? You're kind of left to guess for yourself. And Of Mice and Men is a novella about a man with a mental illness and his best friend as they're going through life, trying, especially this particular point in their lives, trying to make money and be able to make their own place, and the guy has to watch out for the man, his friend, who has mental health issues, because he's really easily taken advantage of. And this book does a really great job of looking at that super important relationship and looking at the meaning of friendship and looking at mental illness. And again, John Steinbeck took a huge message, put it in a small book, and did really well and just punches you in the gut with this story. The last recommendation that I have for Emma Chapman is The Grown-Up by Gillian Flynn. This is Gillian Flynn's novella. It's kind of a thriller. I did read The Grown-Up last year. I don't remember everything that it was about, but it's basically kind of this horror thriller that just plays with your mind and leaves you guessing until the last minute. And from what I remember of the ending, it still leaves off with you guessing what exactly is going on. And I think that it would be a great book for Emma Chapman to read because she tries to leave you guessing throughout the book. But by the time I got to the end of How to Be a Good Wife, I just didn't really care. The Grown-Up takes the same idea. You don't know what's going on. You don't understand what's happening. Still kind of leaves you guessing, but shortens it. You don't feel disconnected from the story. You don't feel disconnected to the characters, even though it is a small page count. So that is it, at least for now, for my recommendations, book recommendations for authors. I would love to do this video again in the future because I actually had fun with this. Again, remember, this book is entirely based on my own opinions, my own ideas of things. You have every right to disagree with me, but you do not have the right to bully me, and all comments sounding like that will promptly be deleted. So please be my friend on social media, like, subscribe. You can also be my enemy as long as you are respectful about it. I post every Wednesday, Sunday, and I will see all of you in my next video. Bye, friends.